You're listening to the Show We Go Baseball podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into episode 38 of To the Show We Go, featuring Ed Hand and Chris Henrique today with myself, Andrew Parker. If you haven't got a chance to check out some of our episodes this week, we've had two pitchers and a position player from the Red Sox system. We've had Zach Penrod, we've had Taylor Broadway, and we've had Justin Reamer. So if you haven't listened to those, go check those out. Those are intriguing guys. Broadway just had Tommy John. Penrod obviously is very well known in the system, and Reamer was the comp pick for Nathan Eovaldi this past year. So
that sounds like the first sitcom they're going to have on the MLB network. two pitchers and a position player.
I actually don't hate that. I kind of was saying it. I didn't even think about it. But today's episode, it's a special one for me. I said it off air. It's a showing love to the Missouri Tigers again, and obviously, with our football team being very good right now, that's always good. But we have Chad Jennings, the beat writer for the Red Sox from The Athletic. And Chad, before we hop into some, just obviously we were kind of talking about Ohtani off air, some other things. But I just want to see, like, what kind of things are you up to now that the offseason is here?
Oh, well, it's fine. I'm sort of, I'm doing some more like national writing this offseason. So that's kind of been an interesting switch, just thinking of it from a different perspective, right? Like it really does. We get so focused on the Red Sox and, you start, I even remember going into the offseason, I was like, oh, this is a perfect setup for them, right? They need pitching. The only thing this market has is pitching. Perfect. And then you start like take a wider lens. You're like, oh no, every team that has money to spend needs pitching. Like this is going to be kind of a nightmare for some teams are going to be left out. So it's just been a little bit different perspective, but, otherwise, man, it's just I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, dude. All I do is go to like soccer practices and basketball games.
It's Ed just got married not too long ago, so he's now officially that he was gone for a couple weeks, so he's finally back.
I'm off the market.
Yeah. Well,
so
hope you got a good signing bonus.
He'll be next on the kids.
I think it does.
But okay, so I wanted to just start out. Obviously, right now I feel like it's the calm before the storm, I guess you could say, especially in Red Sox world. I feel like it's been on the quieter side since the change for the chief baseball officer has taken place. And with the meetings next week, we thought it would be a great time for you to hop on and maybe just preview it a little bit, and which I'm sure you'll be there next week. And so, what do you take away from the quiet, the just being ultra quiet right now from the Red Sox side of things?
Well, that we know what they're doing, right? I mean, it's pitching, right? Like they've got to try to get pitching. Like Ohtani's out there as this thing that who knows, and look. Could the Red Sox get him? Sure. But, they can spend money. It's not like Ohtani makes any team worse. But, that's sort of its own. It's such a separate thing. It is like there is the offseason and then there's also Ohtani off to the side, right? Like you almost have to compartmentalize all of it. So the fact they're not going, also, the big, Nola signed back with where he was before. And the Cardinals got aggressive early, but that was, a couple of innings eaters, and then they pay the hefty AAV to get Sonny Gray off the market. But like otherwise, do we have any sense of where the pitching market is beyond those guys? It felt like for a while there, for about a week, like, oh man, maybe this is all moving fast. Like that was actually the text that I was sending kind of right after the Gray signing, I guess. I was like, hey, are you guys feeling like, is this about to happen? Like, are we going to get a bunch of pitchers off the board before the meetings? And the universal response from everyone was like, no, it always, when the first people start to fall, everyone thinks it's all going to move. And then it never, like, no, this is the off season, man. It's just, basically they were like, you just want something to write, slow down. Like, okay, fair.
It's interesting that all the starting pitchers so far have been right-handed, and there are a bunch of really good left-handed starting pitchers in there. Is there a reason that it's been all righties and no lefties? Or is it just sort of a coincidence?
I don't know. I would bet that's just a coincidence. Like, so is Montgomery the biggest lefty?
Oh,
Snell.
There's Snell too.
Oh, Snell. Shoot, Snell. I forgot about Snell. But
yeah, Snell, Erod.
Yeah. Well, you're right. There are more lefties out there than I was thinking immediately. But I don't know. I do think some of it is like the big name that's gone is Nola. But that was, he re-signed. And so otherwise, it's those sort of like back end guys with Lynn and Gibson, and then Gray just happens to be the other like big name. So I don't know that there's like a left-right thing there. Montgomery's maybe like one of the guys, and Snell to some extent, that are like kind of, I could imagine teams being a little bit confused on exactly how much to value those guys, right? Like injury history, and like, Montgomery's coming off of a platform year where he was like a freaking superstar, right? And so maybe that slows them down a little bit, right? We kind of, Gray, they get him on a 3-year deal. Age is maybe the biggest concern, and whether his home run rate stays where it was. But you could see, the Phillies being comfortable with Nola. The Cardinals find out they can get Gray on 3 years. That's a little more comfortable. The rest, I think it's more you're trying to sort through a lot of things that make it a little bit maybe more complicated.
And I guess also as well, like I thought it was kind of a coincidence too, Ed, on the pitchers. I didn't really kind of think about that until just now. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But so with the meeting starting next week, when do you expect, I guess from the Red Sox side of things, what are you expecting? Like, I guess just as you're going into it, being like, okay, like we don't know, obviously with the new guy in charge of the team, like we don't know if he's going to be aggressive. We don't know if he's going to just kind of sit back and watch things unfold. But what are you thinking?
I think ownership is motivated. And so I think more than anything, that's the deal. I think if it were Heim still running the show, if it were Dave running the show, and now that it's Breslow running the show, to me, the biggest thing here is ownership knows what the narrative is. And ownership is at all times, the brand of the Red Sox matters, right? And I'm not talking about like necessarily like, you could make a case for like international marketing and all that stuff, but I mean more like locally, the idea of the Red Sox matters, and that the Red Sox have been bad the past 2 years, 3 of the past 4. I think they are well aware of that, and they're motivated by that. And to me, that's the bigger issue than who exactly is running the show. Like maybe Breslow will, he may be a more aggressive guy than Heim was. I think they probably want him to be. But the bigger issue is, I think if ownership has told him, look, we need something here, you've got to make this happen, we need to be better, that to me is more of a push than the personality of the guy running the show. I think if you have the money to spend and it's clear what they need, you got to go get it. And so, I mean, I expect them to get one of them. Yamamoto, I think, is the sort of like the best fit, but I think everyone's going to love that guy because he's so young. But something, I mean, I think if they come out, if all the dominoes start to fall and they're left without someone impact up there, I think that's going to be a massive disappointment. And for me anyway, a big surprise, because I do feel like that they are in a position, they've reset their financial stuff. They're in such a position to spend and have such a need to do something to re-energize everyone, that I just think to miss out on that just seems like I would be really surprised if that happens.
Yeah, you were kind of, to jump in there real quick, does it seem, or is this normal with, it's really quiet from a Red Sox side? You know what I mean? There's not a lot of, I would say, like juice that's kind of flying out there. There's a lot of the same, you know what I mean? Yep. There's a lot of the same information, whether it's coming from, either the Athletic, Mass Live, the Globe. There's little things, but has this front office with Breslow been the most quiet that you've experienced in your time covering the Red Sox? Is this more of a norm? Or I guess also a follow-up to that real quick would be, is you had mentioned the Red Sox and their ownership is very brand focused. Are they wanting Breslow to really go ahead and strike and kind of really kind of reel it in from the perspective of that shock and awe to say, hey, the Red Sox are back, to market it in a certain way?
Well, I don't know if it's the marketing part. I just think they're well aware that they have to prove that they are still a that they're a player for these guys, right? Like, so I don't know that they necessarily want to be able to push out like, hey, we just spent however many $1 million on this guy. But I think they want to bring some of that juice back, right? Yeah, make some smart moves, but let's make a splash now and then that puts us out there. And I don't know that splash doesn't have to be Ohtani, but it needs to be like, let's make a real move that we don't have to justify, right? That you don't have to now explain what we're thinking here. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's all part of it. As for why it's been quiet, the Red Sox, even under Heim and to an extent under Dave too, like they're pretty tight. I mean, they don't leak a lot. It's a pretty tight circle, especially under Dave. I think it was a really tight circle, and with Heim, a pretty tight circle too. And like getting in there to get real meaningful information is tricky. I mean, you get a lot of like, certainly, like, I mean, I've heard names of people they've like done work on and people they've talked to, none of which would surprise you. Like name a big free agent, like they've checked on them and have done research on, underlying metrics and all this stuff. So, you get that, but they run, it's a pretty tight circle, man. And like even guys who I have a really good relationship with, who will talk to me a lot after the fact, even leading up, like I'll ask questions and they're like, look, I get it, but like, I can't tell you where we are on that yet. They're smart with it. They are. And so that's why I think a lot of what you get is kind of vague. And a lot of times you end up hearing some trade stuff coming out because a lot of times that's coming from other organizations. They're the ones sort of leaking out. We talked to this team, we talked to them about this or that. That's some of it. I mean, that's just the way this team operates. And I think that's probably especially happening now under Breslow, because my understanding of it is anyway, like I asked earlier, some guys, like, how has it changed, right? Like, how is he different? Is he listening to different voices? And the response I got from people was like, it's still too early to say. Like there's so much right now about just kind of like up to speed, get everything on track, line up, that it was kind of too early to know exactly, whether everything is significantly different, right? Like they know what they have to do and they're just kind of going after it. So I think that's some of it too, is there's been probably a lot of the stuff behind the scenes is there's still information gathering in so many different ways, like even figuring out some maybe of sort of how Craig works and what he's going to listen to and what he values and what he doesn't. Some of that's probably still being set up. So I think you're maybe not getting even people who are in the know, maybe I think still don't know exactly what to make of all of it. You know what I mean? Like, so you're getting at least in my experience, you're getting information that is like, well, here's this, but I don't know what that means yet. And so, it's like, how much do you go with that? Like, do I, I'm not going to report, well, this guy they're in on, but also I can't really tell if they're really in on him. I know they've talked about him, it's like, that's why I think you're hearing kind of just vague stuff right now.
Yeah, this early on, especially with Breslow having not a lot of experience as far as an executive goes. There aren't really any patterns. Like, with Bloom, there was always, okay, there's going to be an underpriced starting pitching free agent that he's going to take. He's going to pay a little bit more than we expect. Maybe the guy will be Michael Wacha. Maybe the guy will be Garrett Richards. With Breslow, there hasn't really, we just don't have that track record yet. So,
and the market hasn't moved yet either.
Yeah.
Like prices have barely been set. So I think that's some of it too. Trade market really hasn't done anything, I don't think. So we're still there was
the Eugenio Suarez trade. That was kind of neither here nor there.
It's like we don't really have the market's not fully set yet. We don't really know kind of the specifics of the way Breslow is going to go about it, and I think that's sort of slowing down meaningful information. I mean, there's a little bit of information out there, but it's nothing that's really telling you much, because I think to some extent no one really knows exactly what any of this means.
So because you alluded to this a little bit earlier, that it's a good market for pitching, but not really anything else. How much value do you see a guy like Alex Verdugo or Jarren Duran having on the trade market? And I know it hasn't been set yet, but if you were to take a guess, just with what for what teams are looking for, how much value do you see a player like one of those two having?
Well, what's funny is when I first heard the notion of Verdugo for Gleyber Torres, my gut reaction was like, Okay, my gut was the Red Sox would have to add to that.
Yeah,
I
same.
just think, but then I started hearing the opposite so maybe that lines up better than I thought. Like maybe Verdugo's value is higher than I anticipated. Like I can't say I haven't like reported that that's what it is because I didn't hear like, oh, that's the way the trade talks have gone or anything. But just in trying to elicit opinions, I had some people who were like, I don't know, like. Some of it's because of Glaber's defense, right? Like there is a price difference between the two. Like, so I think that there's value there, but you might have to find the right spot, right? Like the Red Sox are not the only team. Chaim Bloom is not the only executive out there who valued years of control, right? The fact that Verdugo has 1 year left that diminishes his value, as well as the fact he just hasn't been the hitter that we all I think everyone kind of thinks he should be the past few years. So I think his value's down, but I also think that teams, value corner outfield defense maybe more than I immediately do in my head, right? Like I don't immediately go, oh, well, the guy's a great corner outfielder. Like, you know what I mean? Like I don't immediately put that at the top of my, like that guy gives that guy value, but I think teams do, and within the metrics that they're using, right? Like they give that value. So I bet there's more value there than we're thinking for a corner outfielder who's been like a league average hitter. But I still think the fact that there's only 1 year left, you're going to have to it's going to have to line up just right, like a Glaber situation, right? A 1-for-1, 1 year for 1 year situation where it just lines up just right. So does he have value? Yeah, I think so. Especially in a market this light on position players, but the mitigating factors that we see, I think, are mitigating factors for everyone.
To piggyback,
somebody like Duran, though, do you think
Duran
would be on the market?
I don't know. That's a harder one for me because I think you'd have to figure out how the Red Sox think of him. Like when Duran was struggling, I can't remember in whatever 15 years going back to when I was covering the Yankees. I can't remember a young player who came up, struggled, and I heard so universally people in the organization saying we still think he's going to be good. Like so now that he's actually shown that and he's been that guy, and you don't really have a center field solution, like I would think they're super hesitant to trade him. Even the idea of selling high. I mean, maybe, but man, that feels like you'd have to. I would be real. I think they would be hesitant to deal him. Look, you could line some other things up and make it work. You can't dismiss it. And maybe Breslow's less sold on the idea, right? And so that may be one where the new voice coming in, maybe he's less sold on Duran as an impact center fielder, or even a guy who, if you move some things around, right, he takes over and left and Yoshida's DHing, whatever. He might value him differently, but I just know those couple of years that he was in the big leagues and was not getting there, I was always surprised at how many people would keep saying like, we still think it's going to work. I'm like, I don't know, guys. I mean, you've given this 2 years. Like, I get that he's built like a monster and like fast and has all these, but like it hasn't worked. And then all of a sudden you see it last year. So I don't know. The idea of them trading him right now, it feels a little bit unlikely to me. But again, we just put a new person in charge who's might value him differently than I'm expecting.
How do they look at Cedar Rafaela then? Who, I mean, center field's considered his strongest position. He plays shortstop. That generally means he can play second base. Do they see him as a big part of the future? Or is he more of like a trade piece?
No, he was. That's why they were hesitant to trade him at the deadline last year. They saw him as a guy who was going to play a role this year. But I do think there's some acknowledgement internally that there is a chance the bat's not going to play, right? Like, I mean, the defense is there. He's going to be able to play different spots. He's a good center fielder. There is still I don't know that you go, okay, we're going to give him center field next year. Like the idea of using him next year, I totally think they're on board with that. I think that's a huge reason they held on to him, is feeling like that's the guy that they could bring up and use in any situation, or even, whatever, put him on the opening day roster if he play, there are lots of ways they could use him. I just think the idea of saying like, okay, we are willing to make moves that commit to this guy as our future in center field, or at least for 2 years until ideally Roman Anthony is ready. Like I don't know that they would be at least eager to make that leap, like maybe willing to if some other pieces line up. But that's sort of always been my sense on Rafaela is I think they like him. I think they want him. I think they feel like there are ways that they're going to be able to use him maybe even significantly in 2024. But I also think the idea of just going like, okay, yep, this is it. I don't know that they're there.
Yeah, I definitely think that if to piggyback on that would, there's reasons behind him playing all outfield positions throughout the minor league system. There's a reason why they're trying him out at second base. And, if they'll use him to your point, but if an opportunity that comes along where, look, it's no secret Dylan Cease is the number one trade commodity that's out there. If you can talk the White Sox into, all right, well, Meyer is not going to be available and Anthony is not going to be available in this particular transaction, but Rafaela and more is, I think that's where the Red Sox aren't going to have any hesitation. And they're going to say, we like you, but we're going to move on because the greater of the two is Dylan Cease, and the longevity of what you're going to get out of Cease, I think, is going to outweigh Rafaela. Just my opinion on that. I did want to ask you, though, really quick about Verdugo. Is there any chance that you think that he could be back next season and maybe Breslow will give him the full year look to decide on whether or not he is worth the potential extension?
Yeah, absolutely. I brought that up with guys last year. I was like, don't you need to make a decision on Verdugo? And because I felt that, like, go back to like a Hunter Renfroe, right? Like that offseason, that felt like you need to either decide you're committing to this guy or not, right? Like what's the kind of the point of the one last year? And that idea that I brought up to guys was like almost universally dismissed. They were like, no, it's fine. You bring back guys on a one last year and see what to do with him then. Like I don't think they're hesitant to do that at all. Like because they also don't have, they are very left-handed, but take him out. Abreu was good last year, but I don't know. I still think there's a certain amount of comfort in Verdugo, and I think they do think that he can be a better hitter. Like all the reasons that a team would be intrigued to trade for him, I think the Red Sox are aware of those things too, right? And so those are all reasons to keep him. I don't think that it's completely out of the question that they could keep this guy and just roll with him for one last year and see what happens. I think that's a justifiable thing to do. With the team in the position that it is right now. But it's one last year and he hasn't been that good of a hitter. I think there's also all the reasons in the world that they're willing to talk about trading him. So I wouldn't dismiss the idea of him being back. I just think going in, thinking of him as a trade chip, I just think makes way too much sense if you can move him to fill a hole that whether it's pitching or something up the middle, that just makes too much sense to not at least look into it.
And so pitching aside, and you just alluded to it, actually, probably the biggest hole on the roster is at second base. And I think that's pretty obvious. And they did just trade away a second baseman not too long ago. So what are you thinking that how they're going to attack that? Is it going to be, they obviously have Emmanuel Valdez still there that could be an option to be your starting second baseman. Or, and Ed's alluded to it, you have as well, the middle infield market is pretty bad in free agency. Or is it going to be a trade? Like, what are you thinking that's how they're going to do that?
It makes me think of, like, okay, last offseason, when I would ask about catching, because that felt like very like, oh, golly, what do you have here? Everyone was like, no, we're actually think like compared to like catching kind of sucks in the big leagues, right? Like there are 3 everyday catchers in the major leagues. That they were like, look, we actually think this combo is pretty good, and we're not, if they could get Sean Murphy, I think they were going to try to, but they found the asks too high. But they really did feel pretty comfortable with those guys, and that played out, right? Like, not that Wong was like a superstar, but he was a pretty decent big league catcher. Reese in that number 2 role as a left-handed bat kind of fits, right? It's just not the worst combination. No one's claiming this is like the best catching 1-2 punch in the big leagues, but like, is it legitimately a top 30 thing? Like, or you're getting like big league production there? Sure. I don't know that I hear when people talk about second base, it isn't quite the same as that, right? Like, it's like, yeah, we think these guys are good. Like, we could do this, but I think there's more of an acknowledgement of needing something in there. Now, whether that becomes a bigger investment, I think might depend on what happens with the bigger guys they're going after, right? Like last year, they did not go into last offseason planning to sign Kenley Jansen. Just as starters came off the market, and particularly when the early attempts to get Nate Eovaldi didn't work, they pivoted because they felt like, okay, let's try to shore up pitching this way and work from the back end. I could see that happening at second base, right? Like you're okay with going with sort of a smaller option there if you feel comfortable that you've been able to address others. Like what right-handed bat can you get, right? Like can you get a good right-handed bat that is going to, basically replace Justin Turner as your everyday DH and also whatever, mix and match in the corners or something. And you get Yamamoto at pitcher, like, okay, but now maybe you feel like, all right, well, you know what? We're actually in not a bad shape here. Maybe we don't need to go all out and make second base a huge priority and you go get something smaller. But if something like that falls apart and you take like a lesser right-handed bat, now maybe you go after something more substantial. But again, the market for that is so bleak, like I mean, there are a lot of fun things about Whit Merrifield, but I don't know that you go like, okay, now we're, he's not hitting leadoff anymore. You know what I mean? Like, so, I don't know. The pivoting at second base is a little bit trickier because it's in that way, I guess, similar to catcher. Like, what is the what is the number one option? Like, who's the best you can get there?
Yeah, it's like basically your choices are either Merrifield, who is, like you said, he can do a lot of fun things, but he's past his prime, or somebody like a Tim Anderson, who you have,
right,
who's never played second base and who's coming off not just one of the worst seasons of his career, one of the worst seasons in baseball last year. So, like, where do you even pivot? You have to
situation, especially depending on the ask. Like you could imagine like things play out where they're like, you know what? Yeah, let's see what Anderson has, and we have these guys in house that we feel like we could fall back on. Like it depending on the cost, it's, you don't necessarily hate that idea. Guy was really good for a while. But again, there's so much, there's just not like a real slam dunk solution at second base right now.
I'm going to go a little away from baseball here for a second because I've been following you for a while, and I don't think I may have seen you address this at some point, but every time, you look at your bio on Twitter X, it's a former Missouri tractor driver.
Yeah.
I don't know if you said this story recently or anything, but like, how did that come to, like, how did you get to where you are now from like that?
Oh, well, my dad's a farmer.
Okay.
In Missouri. So, I mean, I was driving tractors in fields when I was 12 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the only jobs I've ever had are working on a farm and working for newspapers.
Wow.
Well, I guess I technically don't work for a newspaper now, but whatever you call what I work for now. So then, I went to Mizzou, my first job was in Scranton, Pennsylvania. After that, I kind of thought I was going to be a basketball writer and got to Scranton and was covering AAA ball, and from AAA, then got the Yankees job and married a girl from Linfield, Massachusetts, and wound up in Boston. And here we are. Former Missouri tractor driver, current baseball writer in Massachusetts.
I've always been curious about that because I've seen that. I mean, obviously I knew you were a Mizzou guy, but I'm just like, did he like, I was like, I don't think I've ever heard the story. Like, did you I want to be, following the family footsteps or something? And then you were like, no, I'm actually pretty good at this writing thing. So I'm going to hop
That's really kind of what it was. I mean, I always assumed I'd be a farmer. That was kind of just what it was, right? Like that's what my dad does that's what his dad did. And then I was like in junior high or something, I had to write an essay and all my friends were complaining about it. And I was like, I kind of like that. I liked the writing part, and started trying to think about ways to do that. And writing about sports seemed a lot more fun than covering city council meetings. And so I went that direction. But I did used to, I still have, actually it's funny, like maybe not the last one I was home, but time before maybe, I found in this old desk drawer an old notebook. And I remember I used to do this. It's just pages of every team, like whatever, White Sox written at the top. And then it's my lineup, what I would do for the lineup, the bench, the rotation. And I would do this from Baseball Digest. Remember that magazine?
Oh, yeah.
And I would, in the back, it had the 40 man for every team. And I would like just go through it. I would just start at the top and I would just make lists of I loved roster stuff with baseball even when I was a kid. So to some extent, I guess I was always a little bit into this kind of thing. I still am kind of a geek for roster stuff, right? Like I came up, my first job was covering AAA. I covered AAA ball in Scranton for 6 years. I started there when it was the Phillies affiliate. Like I covered Chase Utley in AAA, and Ryan Howard and Cole Hamels and so covering the minor leagues, like knowing how roster rules work, man, like that's half the game. Understanding who's going to get called up and who's being sent down and who has options and who doesn't. And I mean, like I had to figure out all that stuff really quickly, and I still am kind of a nerd for that stuff. Like I love Rule 5 protection. Like I just think it's fascinating. And I mean, like there is no, back when I don't know, there were maybe times when there was like an audience for that, but I don't know. It's hard for me to pitch The Athletic on like, can I have 3,000 words about why it's fascinating whether they put this one guy on the 40-man? They're like, I don't know, dude. Make it 50 words and we'll talk.
Well, on that note, what did you make of Shane Drohan being left off of the 40-man? Did that come as a surprise to you? I was very surprised. Yeah, a little bit. It's hard to dismiss the struggles when he got to AAA, right? And so, yeah, I mean, surprised. Yeah, I still thought that just based on where things are with pitching that they would protect him. But I can't say that I felt shocked by it. Like, again, it was a really great first month in Portland. And then it changed so much that it's hard to dismiss that. And look, I mean, I went down to Portland early last year and wrote about how he was like the evidence of the pitching gains they'd made. But I think there's some risk there. It's like with Thaddeus Ward right the year before, right? Like and I do it. I mean, I'm just talking about how much I think like 40-man ads and Rule 5 protection is amazing. But we do, I think, sometimes make a bigger deal out of it than we maybe should, because if they lose, even if they look, they lost Ward, right? And he's stuck all year. He's gone. I like Thaddeus Ward. He's a pretty good pitcher, but like I don't think he's making and breaking the system, right? And I think you run into some of that too. Like who would you rather have this year, like Drohan or give another shot to Brian Mata, right? Because in the end, it ends up being that. Like you end up all those 40-man spots, like it comes at someone's expense, and we always tend to dismiss them as like it's the whatever Wyatt Mills of the world or whatever. But like those are guys they end up grabbing when there's an open spot. Like I think they think of the trade-offs more than we think they do. And they play it out more than we tend to do, right? You go, oh, there's an open spot on the 40-man and they didn't protect this guy. Like that's not an open spot on the 40-man. That's the spot that's going to go to whatever pitcher they're going to sign. And if they've decided that they're going to sign 2 pitchers and a right-handed bat, and if they are more in on a second baseman than we realize, that means there's not just there are 4 spots they've got to, like, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I'm a little bit surprised on Drohan because I know that they like him and we're really happy with what he did. But I think that to some extent there's more of a trade-off than we think. It feels like it's a free spot. Just put the guy on the 40-man. What are you doing? But I think they start looking at roster situations a little bit differently, and they try to think farther down the road. And and again, losing him, they may not. I don't know that they clearly are not sold that Drohan's going to be a future ace, right? Or else he would be protected. Right. So there's a chance they lose him? Sure. Ward was the number 1 Rule 5 pick last year and had, what did he have? Like a 7 or something? I mean, there's also always the chance you get the guy back, like they did with AJ.
Totally. Oh yeah. I mean, it's even probably more likely, right? Like, I mean, these guys don't stick that often, and so yeah, I don't know. I just think it is a weird one because he was so good last year and in the beginning and did sort of seem to be like just on a little bit of a rocket ship early in the year.
They just don't have that many lefties either.
Yeah,
They don't have
totally.
that much starting pitching depth at that level. So it seemed to me like they must really not have liked what they saw when he came up, and maybe it was just the drop. Maybe it was just the drop in the velocity. Maybe it was the results. I don't know, but
and maybe they lump him in now with Walter and Murphy and feel like we're kind of covered there, right? Like if they feel like that's a redundancy, it's not to say they don't think he's a big league pitcher, but they might feel like it's a little bit redundant for where we are. And if that's the case, maybe you risk losing him in the Rule 5 and, you're not
going to be able to sneak Murphy or Walter through at this point. But
maybe
you can with Duran.
Right. Well, you certainly, I think you've got a better chance of sneaking a guy through the Rule 5 than a guy with options through waivers, right? Like a team can claim a Chris Murphy and know they can send him to AAA. They can't do that with Duran through this process, right? Like if you're going to grab him, you gotta not only, and as people have pointed out to me before, it's not just that you have to keep him all next season. You got to keep him the rest of the winter. And we don't think of that as a big deal, but I think teams do. Like that starts to hamstring some moves you might have to make going forward. And then do you end up, because of this Rule 5 guy, do you end up having a DFA a Chris Murphy, right? Like that type of guy who you kind of like. I think that the 40-man spots end up being, front offices think of them as being more valuable, I think, than we tend to immediately think of them from the outside.
All right, guys. It's almost getting to that point of the show where I'm going to ask our guest the revolving question that I've asked every single other guest that's hopped on here. And I have a lot of faith.
You'll ever answer.
I have a lot of faith in you, Chad, because you are a Mizzou guy.
Okay.
And you're still a young guy. You're not old yet.
Listen, I played rec league basketball last night. I feel like the oldest person on the planet today. Like my 6-year-old was like, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, "Daddy can't move. Sorry." Dad had to run for an hour and a half yesterday. Yeah.
I feel I'm there. I'm still on the right side of 30, and I feel like that now. So I'm looking forward to that. But
yeah.
All right. So you're not an old guy yet. All right. You're not there yet.
That. Yeah.
So I have faith in you on this one that you might answer this question correctly, because there is a right answer and there's a lot of wrong answers. So you go and get in your car, right? And you're thinking fast food tonight, and you specifically want fast food fried chicken, like a sandwich or something, right?
Okay.
And every single option is available to you. Where are you driving to?
For a chicken sandwich?
Or just fried chicken in general? Yeah, like fast food wise.
I would go to Chick-fil-A.
Okay.
Why? Is that a terrible answer?
It's the best answer.
Not the right.
That's my answer.
Yeah. I
expected a little better out of you for being a Missouri guy, but
what were you going to say?
Zaxby's.
Oh, good grief.
I love it.
Did they not have Zaxby's in Columbia when you were there?
I don't think they did. I know that they're around now.
Yeah, there's two. There's the one over off of University. I think it's I forgot where they threw one at. They threw one by that hotel, like off campus a little bit, like south. That's down the street from the stadium.
You're gonna cut this segment when you actually air this, right?
Probably.
No okay.
It's because I reached out to Zaxby's social team and I'm like, listen, I've asked this question to every single person that's come on. I've only gotten them twice, but I sent them the 2 clips of Alex Benellis. Alex Benellis was like over here just like preaching it. He was like, hey, they have chicken salad. They have this, they have that. And I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. But
all right. I'm sure it's fine.
All right. It just wasn't the answer that I was. Well,
I understand. Listen, I feel your disappointment.
I don't think you understand. My mom, when I would go home for Christmas.
I definitely don't understand.
My mom would give me $100 gift card to Zaxby's because I went so often, because there was 2 in Columbia, and I don't know why, but I went all the time. And she would give me $100 gift card at Christmas. She's like, and I'm like, this is only going to last me for like a month because I love this place so much. But
I hope she gave you health insurance too.
Yeah, I was on there for a little bit. Right, like it's. But
I just like seeing the disappointment on Andrew's face whenever they say Chick-fil-A or other options. So
I have a non-chicken related question for you, Chad. That, I've been meaning to ask, and I couldn't find the right time in this to do it. But you wrote an expose on one of my favorite minor league players ever. And that's Big Joe Davis.
Big Joe, yeah.
How did that come to be?
So I obviously knew of him, right? And had talked to some people about him a little bit. And then it was when they announced they were doing a bobblehead of him. That's when I pitched it to my editor. I was like, hey, listen, there's this guy, man. I don't know what his deal is, but I've been looking him up and he seems awesome. Yeah, dude, he was great. I loved writing that story and talking to people about him. It was so fun. And then I did that story over the phone that offseason, and then I got to spring training, and the first day I saw him, he had a giant black eye. So I talk about just like fitting the narrative, man. I was like, yes, this is who you're supposed to be. He had been like taking grounders, and the ball had hit the lip of the grass and came up and caught him in the eye. And so the first time I actually met him face to face, this guy I'd talked to and written about him as this like folk hero, he's just like all mangled. And I was like, yeah, buddy, that's right. You probably got that fighting a bear, didn't you? But yeah, dude, he was awesome. And, I felt for him a little bit, those guys, good for him for kind of like recognizing and moving on, I think, when he did, because I hate when guys kind of hang on a long time and when, from the outside, you can kind of feel like you see there's not really much of a pathway there. He sort of seemed to understand that the pathway was not that he's a bad player, but like the pathway for a first base only guy. I mean, you got to hit the boatload. And so, moved on and retired. And I hope that, things are going really well for him, because he's a really good dude and could hit. I mean, look, the guy could hit. Like, that's what he went into baseball to try to hit balls a long ways. And by golly, he did it at a pretty high level, and I think rightly people responded to that. It was really cool. It's really neat when a minor league guy becomes known without being in Baseball America or whatever. It takes a sort of special, not just special player, but like personality. You've got to have some other things going on. And what else it takes is your teammates recognizing that. Like, a guy like that doesn't become what he becomes when he's sort of like known to the fan base and has a bobblehead made if he's not really loved and respected in the clubhouse. Like, the clubhouse just wouldn't allow it, right? Like, if there's some like super quirky guy who a minor league organization wanted to be like, let's make a bobblehead of this guy, if he were hated in the clubhouse, there's no way that would fly, right? You could never do that. And that just clearly was not the case with this guy. It was fun. I even just didn't like texting guys in the organization. I was like, hey, I'm thinking of writing a thing about Joe Davis. And everyone was like, yes, do it. I will talk about Joe Davis as much as you want. Yeah, it was cool. He's fun.
I was going to say we had Steven Scott on, who was the other member of the Meatball Gang. And Ed had to ask some Joe Davis questions. Obviously, the trailer aspect. I mean, it is just that story is one of my favorites. But Steven Scott, by the way, is still a great talk. Like he's
awesome.
Meet him in Worcester.
Yep. Yeah. I've been able to talk to him a few times. He's a good guy, and he's made himself pretty interesting. The catching thing is, if he, I don't know. I mean, you never know. Guys like it's. I always feel like I remember the guy that I always think of is the Yankees had a guy named Colin Curtis. I don't know if you remember him, left-handed hitter, kind of a very like super typical fifth outfielder profile. Like, could play center field, but wasn't really a good center fielder. Had some power, but not a ton. Could run, but not a ton. Got up to the big leagues a little bit. But anyway, I remember somebody asked me once, like, what do you think of Colin Curtis? And I was like, oh, I think he's good. Like, I really like him. And they're like, oh, I heard he's maybe just like a fourth or fifth outfielder. I was like, yeah, dude, he's good. Like, crazy good you have to be a fourth or fifth outfielder in the freaking big leagues. Like, that's a really good player. So I think sometimes, we get a little bit caught up in like, you want them all to be superstars. It's like, no, like some of these dudes are like really, really good. And that means that they have a chance to be a bench player in the big leagues. And that's enough, man. That's a lot. So, a guy like Scott, you kind of, with that, if he can catch and, could play the corners if necessary, and he's hit, and they in fact, they send him to the fall league, makes you be like, all right, they're paying attention to him. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's not like you go, this guy's definitely going to come up and help, but I don't know. There's enough to be sort of paying attention to that guy.
Yeah, I felt like every time he got up to the plate in Worcester, once he got called up, he was hitting 3-run homers every single.
Yeah.
It seemed like every other bat he was hitting them. And
Yeah.
Chad Tracy even kind of joked with us about that as well. It's like you want him up with 2 guys on. But
Yeah.
All right, guys, emptying the bench. You've given us 45 minutes of your time, Chad. We appreciate that a ton. Any final questions before we let him go? I know he's got a very busy week next week. So, Chris, Ed, anything to finish us off here?
Did you grow up a Cardinals fan?
I did. Yeah.
What was like the prime era for you growing up? Like,
well,
was that like player, the McGuire? The McGuire years?
McGuire was more like that was high school for me. Like Willie McGee is my favorite player of all time. He was so those Cardinals team that went to the World Series in '85 and '87. I was 5 and 7 years old for those. So like yes, I remember having baseball cards in '86 and '87, but like I would say when I really was old enough to like really follow it was more sort of in the later 80s, early 90s is when I was like, super locked in as a little kid. Right.
Yeah.
So, Ozzy and
that was what I was about to. I have to ask this for my dad. How good, for people that never got to see him play, how good was Ozzie Smith's defense?
Well, I mean, look, it's coming from the most biased point of view there could possibly be. But I mean, I really genuinely I feel like I don't think I've ever seen anything like it since, and I've watched a lot of baseball. I mean, I watched him every night for years. But yeah, I mean, it was just special. Like you go back and watch clips and you think that they were managed to pull like the 10 greatest plays he ever made. And that's why this highlight reel exists. Like, no, like that stuff happened regularly. I mean, he just did these things. It's remarkable. Yeah, he was super special. And, I mean, on those teams back in that day, the way he hit kind of played, right? Like with some speed and could hit for an okay-ish average. He hits that 1 home run in the playoffs. But I mean, he was just such an exciting player to watch. And that style of baseball to come up with, I always say that I may have said it to you all before, but that I love speed in baseball. Not that I think it's like the most important thing. Not that I go go get a guy because he has speed, but just it's like visually watching baseball when speed gets involved, whether it's a guy like trying to steal a base, leg out a triple, a guy in the outfield chasing down a fly ball, whatever, like watching speed in baseball is so fun to me. I just think that it's so exciting. It's more, to me, that's more exciting than like watching the home run, right? Like a guy, it's amazing. A guy hits a home run 5,000 feet. You're like, wow, that was really cool. But just for the excitement of watching a guy really, really run in a baseball game is, I think, awesome. Just really, it's just stimulating. And that's the kind of baseball I grew up with, right? Like the running Redbirds when I was a kid, Vince Coleman and Willie McGee and Ozzie Smith and all those guys running like crazy. So I wonder if that's maybe some of where that comes from for me, that I do just enjoy watching speed in baseball. I love watching Duran play. It's just fun. I wonder if some of that comes from that, right? Like as a kid, that was kind of my introduction to baseball, was a team that just ran all the time.
All right, Chris, do you have any finishing thoughts here?
No, well, when you mentioned Willie McGee, I remember he played for the Sox 1 year, and then he went to St. Louis to finish out the career. That was like that 95, 96 is when I really started to get into baseball. So Willie McGee is like one of those first players that I would remember.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning that you're starting to do a little more national stuff. So I just want to fire off a question. So the Brewers are going to sign, or expected to sign, Shohei to that mega deal. Do you think there is an appetite for Boston to do that, a similar deal to a guy like Meyer or even Anthony? Maybe not so now, or do you think Breslow takes a year, sees what he has with those players before doing something like that?
Yeah, my gut, and I mean, again, this is all new, right? Like we don't know how he's going to approach it. My gut feeling would be, I think you wait another year. Especially, Anthony's, not that I don't think he's good, but like, I mean, it's 1 year, right? Like we're basing this on like this incredible breakout season. Meyer's kind of the opposite, right? Like just got hurt. Like I think you'd maybe want to wait. They both, logically could be, at least should finish next year in AAA, right? Like I would think you'd wait to do that sort of thing. It is also funny to me to look back, like what young player has signed one of those pre-big league deals that didn't work out great for the player, right? Like, I mean, it's basically, Kingery comes to mind, obviously, but what was the kid from the Astros, the first baseman? Singleton. Like those guys, like it makes sense. And the Rays had it kind of with Wander Franco, right? They waited till he got to the big leagues and then signed him, and that's been a disaster for a whole other podcast worth of reasons. But I don't know. Like it feels like, oh man, that's such a great and smart thing to do to lock him up. But it's kind of like every time we've seen one of these young players sign one of those early deals, I don't know. It hasn't really played out all that well for the big league team.
Even Evan White too at the Mariners.
I actually forgot about that. Yeah.
I mean, I think it was once Chiro signs, he'll be the 6th player. And out of the ones you just listed to, really, it's just Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in my opinion, I mean, Jimenez has worked out, but I mean, this is a guy that's always hurt every year.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess it worked out. But I think it goes to kind of show where, Red Sox fans are very, very hungry for this team to get younger players locked up. And there doesn't always, to me, I don't really see a lot of the urgency to do that, because you still have that, renewal that you can do, and then you still got arbitration. I think it's before you get to the art part. There is, in my opinion, there is no rush for guys like Meyer or even I think they should go one more year with Bayo to really make sure that he is going to be what they think he's going to be. I would go one more year and see what you have there. And I would do the same with Tristan Casas. I know people will disagree with me on probably those players, but that's just, if I was in charge, that's what I would do. I'd wait one more year on those guys.
Well, and it depends on what the ask is, right? Like, I mean, if they're, if Casas is saying, like, right now I want the Devers deal, like, well, you know what I mean? Like, you got, so it all depends. It's always about sort of both sides too. Like but there are situations, Whitlock signed that extension after one season, right? And I think there's still I think there's an appetite for it, but it's just like with free agency too. I mean, it's got to line up. I mean, it can make all the sense in the world, but if the other side's looking for something different, it can't possibly work.
Well, Chad, we appreciate all the time you've given us. You're very generous with the time, and I know that it's, like I said, it's about to be a very busy time for you. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we appreciate it a ton.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Happy to do it again at some point.